Hi everyone, Mark here, TSLA. And as you can see on the screen, Tesla closed in the green, $281.38, and that translated to a 1.25% increase over yesterday, which was actually fairly decent if you were speaking in relative terms, due to the rest of the market maybe not being so great. So it's nice to see Tesla closing higher than the indices and other tickers. But before we dive into the stock, let's just get to some quick Tesla news. And as you can see on the screen, Sawyer Merritt on Twitter has broken news that Tesla's battery supplier Panasonic is going to be setting up a plant in India. So it says Tesla has reportedly asked its battery suppliers to engage in negotiations with the Indian government to establish a battery manufacturing unit or manufacturing units in the country. So that could mean, one of two things that they just want to manufacture batteries in India and have them exported to another country for assembly, or they're trying to create a supply chain within the country to create product. Now, we don't know what that product is yet because it could be one of two things. It could be a megapack factory and they can do just big battery storage systems, or they can be doing a new car factory, a gigafactory, instead of a megapack factory. Now, is there arguments for either? Well, you could say that we are pretty backed up when it comes to megapack factory output. We have megapacks being delayed or back order. I'm sorry. I think 2 years into 2025. So we need some more production somehow, some way. But is India really the best place to do it? Possibly. But it seems like we would have a lot of customers, in the western parts of the world as well, here in America and in Europe especially. So. And these are really big, bulky items, or like big as like a shipping container, maybe. So having to transport them from India to America or to Europe would be problematic. But they do have a big customer base in the Indian Ocean area, which would be like western parts of Australia. There's a lot of developed areas. We have like Singapore, Kuala Lumpur. You have Southeast Asia too. Parts of China as well. So, that could work really good, but, China itself has a megapack factory. So maybe it is a car factory. Maybe it's going to be a gigafactory or some type of car factory, especially one for the new generation, which would be the kind of the smaller $25,000, $30,000 price range vehicle. And why could that be? What do you think that would be more appropriate for India? And it really could be, because the fact is, maybe that market would actually be a big purchaser of those cars. Like, the Indian market be interested in that type of price range for a vehicle, and they can also export it pretty close by to other areas, be it China, Australia, Japan, or otherwise. Because the smaller size cars and some more affordable cars might be much better for economies of that type. But let's keep going. So we can get to some macroeconomic news real quick, just so we can be mentally prepared for next week's events. By the way, today there was a consumer confidence survey, I believe, from the University of Michigan, which comes out once a month. And it came out really, really good, like much more than anyone expected, I believe in the 70s. During that during that release, price action is typically pretty volatile during that report I don't know why. I really don't understand why, but it could be because it used to track something really important for the markets, which was like the idea of what we thought, individual people, how inflation will look like in the next year or so. The thing about that is that's kind of weird. Like, you're asking just normal people to kind of like help you understand how we think inflation will look like. We don't even have a good concept of it. Anyways, like, when people think inflation, they think prices will increase and the prices will then come down after inflation goes away. But the reality is, inflation is just a tracker of year-over-year or month-over-month pricing. There's no implication that if inflation goes to 0%, the prices come down. It just means prices didn't go up. So yeah, I never understood why it was so important and why it's so volatile, but it is what it is. Though it was volatile, you can probably tell it didn't really affect the actual price of the market very much, because it would drop down a little bit and the market kind of recovered. And so it wasn't that huge of a deal. It's a great way to blow through stop losses. But Monday of next week, Empire State Manufacturing Survey. Basically, the Fed is going to interview businesses around the New York area to see how are they feeling about their prospects in the country. And usually, for manufacturing now, it's typically feeling pretty bad. And on Tuesday, U.S. retail sales minus autos, industrial production, capacity utilization, how much like we're actually using of our manufacturing output, business inventories, and home builder confidence index. So these might sound kind of weird, but some of this is pretty important because we have a lot of earnings that are coming out soon. So retail sales and business inventories, they kind of go hand in hand for U.S. retailers. Like let's say a Nike, for instance. Like if you're big into Lululemon, these companies that have been really inundated with back orders from the COVID era, they're sitting on all this inventory they thought they needed, and they pre-ordered and ordered a lot, so thinking that there would be a lot of demand still. The reality was, rates went up, demand for a lot of things has gone down, and the buildup of inventories has really affected the performance of stocks of places like Costco, Target, and the aforementioned Nike. So if you're seeing inventories come down, along with retail sales still hanging in there, we're not looking for it in May. Look, so they're expecting 0.5%. As you can see here, we don't want to be much higher than 0.5% because all it means is like higher retail sales just means we have the ability to pay for things still, and then the Fed would be very comfortable raising rates. So it's kind of worrisome if things were to really beat the number too much. And on the flip side, if we miss the number and we're much lower in retail sales, the reality is that sounds bad, and it's bad for retail companies like the Nikes of the world. But it also means that we might not need to raise rates if the consumer is really feeling the effects of all these rate increases. That should be felt with lower retail sales, right? Possibly. So also home builder confidence index and housing starts. So that kind of flows into Wednesday. Housing starts will report before the market open. And so the reason I'm talking about this, I believe there's going to be some, if you're into like trading home builder stocks, and home builders have been doing really well this year, that this could be a little buoy for them. Thursday, initial jobless claims as per the usual, Philly Fed manufacturing survey for the Philadelphia area, existing home sales. That doesn't really matter for home builders, but it does kind of matter and understand how our rates are affecting people's purchasing ability. U.S. leading economic indicators. Curious if we're going to beat on this because we never really do. And Friday, nothing. But what's actually happening on these days, maybe economic drops aren't as titillating, but what's actually happening is going to be the real start of the earnings seasons. So we had banks today, and banks did good, but they all kind of sold off a little bit. Because the thing about it, when it comes to that, you're probably wondering, like, if banks did so well, why did they not really hold their price? Like, they went up maybe 4% and sold off all day long. Well, the reality is, they're we don't know what is priced in. We don't know what the street was anticipating when it comes to like, their valuation of these companies. So it's best to think like this. When it comes to bank earnings, you have a big kind of inundation of them on the first day, which is typically like the JP Morgan and the Citibank. But the thing about it is you have more banks that follow up. So as you can see from the screen, we're going to have some regional banks here, and then we're going to have some big banks again, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, and then Goldman Sachs on Wednesday. Is it Wednesday? Yeah, Goldman Sachs here on Wednesday before the open. So they want confirmation. It's kind of like when you have a good CPI number last week and the market didn't really rip. It just kind of chilled. And then Thursday you had a good PPI number and then it ripped. So maybe they're wanting confirmation. So that's possibly what's happening. Yeah, that's possibly what's happening. They want confirmation that the other banks are going to do well. And we want to see the health of the smaller banks, be it the first banks or the equity bank shares. So that's all happening on Monday. So we're going to have regional banks flow into big banks with a mix of regional banks. You're going to have JB Hunt, which is like trucking, which has been really suffering lately because there has been a very low demand in freight truck. Ironically, freight train is really high demand and really backed up, and we've been having a lot of logistic problems with trains being derailed and such. Into Wednesday, like I mentioned, we had Goldman Sachs for the open. ASML would be they make the manufacturing machines for making chips, like for TSMC. So we have some energy stuff too. So Halliburton and Baker Hughes, which is they're like oil field servicing companies. A little bit more banks. So if you like banks, this is going to be your KRE week or your XLF week. And of course, we're going to have our big day on Wednesday after the close with Tesla, Netflix. Those are the pretty Discover, and Kinder Morgan's another oil. Sands, if you're trying to catch this travel boom. But Tesla and Netflix are the big ones. Tesla especially, because we love Tesla. And it's going to be really interesting how this is going to work out. As we get closer to it, we'll Monday and Tuesday, we'll see how the price action works out, and we can talk about what we need to do a little bit more. On Thursday, before the open, TSMC, which would be kind of a good barometer for demand for like things like Apple, who need chips, or other companies like Nvidia who are needing chips. And we can actually then have a confirmation. Okay, so yeah, we're producing all these things for Nvidia. We're doing good too. And then Nvidia can go up again, and Nvidia is going to never stop going up apparently. Blackstone, which is kind of be like a commercial real estate. So this is something to look into if you are holding things like SL Green. The DR Horton, okay, that's one of the home builders, so that's going to line up good with the home building stuff. So if you're into home building, more regional banks, CSX. Like speaking of trains, trains are pretty good. Warren Buffett likes them. And American Express, SLB is another oil. Huntington is another regional. So regionals. So it's gonna be banking, a lot of banking. Tesla, Netflix, and TSMC basically. Okay, let's go on to a little bit more Tesla news. So Tesla is, so we talked about in another video how we need more volume to get some more cars out and to maybe meet that millions and millions of cars production number. But the thing about it is we haven't selected a country officially for our new car gigafactory car plant. Other than the one that's happening in Mexico, which we know is going to be producing the smaller vehicle, and it has yet to break ground. So I know a lot of people are anxious about that. But the governor of Nuevo León said that they're going through the permitting process and it's almost complete. So we know we're going to have that, and that's going to produce hundreds of thousands of cars. But we talked about in another video how we actually have good capacity potential in the existing plants that we have in Shanghai and in Austin and in Germany. So in Giga Berlin in Germany, they have the potential to increase their capacity from 500,000 to 1 million vehicles by just building another factory. And that's something they're trying to do. And they're putting out the plans to the public, which are required to do, so the public has the ability to look at the plans and respond to them. And they're kind of picky and tricky. It's kind of a tricky system because they have to go through a lot of environmental regulations and approvals because the area they're in is protected, like a watershed area. So that's going to be problematic. But then again, Germany wants them. They're seeing other countries obviously wanting Tesla to build over in Spain, in Italy, and France that are just right next to Germany. So Germany has some incentive to keep Tesla here because maybe they don't need another plant immediately. If they can expand production in Shanghai, which they want to do, they want to add another line, and that's going to require purchasing some land, and now it's becoming kind of an issue. But if they manage to expand production in Shanghai and Germany, they can keep their existing supply chain network around them, and they don't have to develop a whole new one, which could be kind of an issue. But the thing about it is, if for example in Europe they have this love for smaller cars, be it maybe they could have smaller roads or just the culture. We would really need a plant that could really take advantage of that desire to have a lot of smaller cars made. And I can understand, like in India or China, they would like the small cars too, and that's why they might be building a car factory in India. But Europe has a real big demand for the smaller, more affordable vehicles. It's just so I really would like to see somehow, some way, a factory devoted to smaller cars there, or lines are devoted for that. But it'll be really interesting to see how that works out. So yeah, this article just kind of goes on to explain, and this is on auto evolution if you want to read it, the issues with the environment agency requirements and all the paperwork and red tape they have to go through. So the article went to say, according to the plans filed with Brandenburg Environment Ministry, Tesla plans to build another large production hall to house the additional production area. It will also optimize operations at its existing line to increase productivity. As part of the expansion plans, Tesla wants to double the capacity of its battery production facility from 50 gigawatt hours to 100 gigawatt hours per year. So this is really an all-encompassing car, battery, and everything. And like I said, Germany should do it, because otherwise it might really push Tesla to build another factory elsewhere in Europe. For now, you can have this factory expanded, Shanghai expanded, Mexico built, and maybe one in India. And as investors, you maybe want to have a bunch of factories being created, but that's a lot of capex and a lot of spend. And going through cash right now, I don't know if that's really the greatest idea. So if you can expand what you have and kind of keep your costs down without having to build a new supply chain and convince all your suppliers to build factories and send workers to another country, this might be easier in the short term until like 2025. And not to disappoint you guys, but this seems like a better situation. So let's take a look at Twitter, and we have a picture, or a couple more leaked pictures, leaked from the factory, that is, of the Cybertruck. So we can tell that this is the Cybertruck is going on. There is an area dedicated in the factory in Austin for the Cybertruck, but as you can tell, this probably isn't the formal production line. Like, I don't think they'd be putting on these like dollies and having them wheeled around the floor. And I would imagine they would be on some type of assembly line, be it hanging from something or rolling down an assembly line instead of whatever this is. But of course, you've been seeing, if you've been watching news on Twitter about Tesla and Cybertruck, that you've been seeing them driving around and being tested. So obviously they're being produced somehow in some way. So I just think this is kind of just like a transitionary process that they're going through. And they still need to build some test cars and test out the equipment because they have the new gigapresses put in. So they're trying to get that all squared away, I'm sure. But it feels really good, and it's just really positive that we're seeing these pictures coming out from the factory, because obviously they're getting close. And you don't need to have a full assembly line really going and perfect to have a handover event where the first customers receive their first Cybertrucks. Like, we can just have stuff built just like this delivered, and you can kind of get the positive vibes going for investors, and maybe juice up a quarterly earnings report at the end of their quarter, because he kind of promised. Elon kind of promised that we'd have a handover event before the end of this quarter, so that's what we're looking for. But as far as the Cybertruck itself, we saw the other pictures before where it was mostly gray, but now you're seeing it kind of coated, maybe in some type of anti-corrosion coating, because Elon wants this to be a very practical vehicle, being used off-road, being used on in the way trucks are supposed to be used. So it makes sense that he's going to want to make this as hardy as he possibly can. It's kind of interesting, you would probably know, if you know like other EVs, you know that other larger SUVs and pickup trucks might have very thick battery tray underbodies. So I'm thinking that maybe this, just like the Model Y, you would have a battery pack with some interior components attached to the top of it, and it's slipped underneath, and that becomes the rigid body and frame of the car. But I don't really see room for like a double stack kind of battery tray. So I'm wondering how that's going to work. How much battery capacity, if they're gonna go with a single layer of batteries, will it extend into the to the bed area somehow, or will it be double stacked just underneath maybe just underneath the rear seats area? But otherwise, this is really, really good to see, because the more and more news that we have out of the Cybertruck area in Austin, I think we're feeling pretty confident that we can get production started this quarter, and having them start delivered them in number. And now I understand the ramp is going to be tough. It is tough to ramp cars, and we can't really fault Elon for that, because look at all the other manufacturers, GM and Ford. They're having a lot of problems with ramping cars, and then you have VW, who has a big demand problem. Okay, let's talk about the stock market before we switch to the charts. You're probably wondering why we had such good news. Like the market opened up, gapped up in the morning because really strong bank earnings reports. But the reality is, just because something's doing really well, it doesn't mean it has to stay up in pricing if there's other more important factors at play. And on this site, which is maximumpain.com, I just use it as a quick reference to understand what the quote unquote maximum pain is for the day. And on Fridays, since there's more expirations, be it from single tickers of stocks like Tesla or from ETFs and for the indices like the SPY and QQQ, there's a lot riding on where price closes on a Friday. And as you can tell, you know that SPY closed at 449. And why do you think SPY closed at 449? Why is it that? Well, the reality is because it's options. Options really determine what happens in the market. I know that sounds crazy, but options, if there's this big gangbusters move to go long and everyone's buying calls, well, the people that sell the calls, they can't pay everyone out. That's not how business works. They're trying to make money. So they're selling something to you. They don't want to pay you out more. So let's look at the peak in our SPY open interest, and we're seeing a lot of calls for 450. And let's look at the volume of those calls. How many are being purchased? There was a lot of 450 strike calls for SPY. A lot. There was a lot. 700,000. And puts as well at 450, but it's still less than 716,000. And where did pricing end up? 449. So it didn't get to 450, and it still paid out a lot of puts. But at 449 itself, there was still a lot of puts at 449. There was 400,000. So they paid out 463,000 puts, but they didn't pay out 400,000 puts, and they didn't pay out 716,000 calls. So regardless of whatever is going to happen today, due to the way people are purchasing calls, unfortunately, the market didn't want you guys to go up. So they either shorted it down into oblivion or they sold a lot of what they had. Let's switch over to the charts and we'll take a quick look at the market and Tesla. But first things first, we have Tesla. Now, I'm sorry for the messiness, but I really wanted to keep my crude drawings intact so you can see the thought process that we're having and you can kind of compare it to what is actually happening. Now, first things first, we can see, let's see the start of the day. So the 14th. So we started the day around here. So this is the area, and I'll just do it. That's the start of our day. And of course, we ended up a little bit. But we did actually go up really, really high. And we can see why we sold off. But first things first, let's look at the pattern that we drew. So we can see, we were talking in the previous videos about, I was seeing the possibility of something happening, which is inverse head and shoulders, which is having a typical head and shoulders pattern is just it's a flip of this, where you have a shoulder, and this is why they call it a shoulder. So you have a shoulder here, then you have a head, and you have another shoulder. So your left shoulder, head, right shoulder. And in this time, it's inverted because it's upside down. So typically, when people say head and shoulders, it's the upwards version, which is the more bearish. Inverted, which is this one, is typically more bullish because it's showing a bottoming process instead of a topping process. This is a bottoming process in a lot of technical analysis people's point of view. Because what you're essentially is doing is you're testing a low, you're consolidating on the low, you're finding interest, and you bounce up. But you find yourself at a resistance. And the resistance is, and it's obvious now, because what we thought was a double top here previously in the month has now become a place where people want to sell. So you had earlier in the month, it gapped up, it sold off, went near it again, didn't make it, but eventually did hit the same level, sold off, gap down hard. Sold off again, kind of bottoming process, gapped up, and slowly inched its way back to that level. Now there was a lot of enthusiasm for Tesla, and it really spiked up pretty hard. And there's a lot of good news going on with Tesla lately. You know, you have the whole Mercedes thing, and you're seeing a lot of the other traditional manufacturers suffering a lot. And there was a lot of hype with NVIDIA doing really, really well. So there was some positive sentiment coming into the market today. So it was interesting though. If we kind of spread out the price action, is that we went up and we went back down and we tested that low, even though like things like Nvidia were ripping really hard at this point in time, and then we started doing ourselves. Started ripping ourselves, and we ripped past that high, which is that's pretty good. But it sets us up for we have to do that again on Monday or Tuesday. So we breached that high and immediately sold off. And you can tell we tried that high again, right? So we tried that same high, we tested it and rejected and sold off again. Now, the reality is, all of the other market was selling at this time. And at this time, big sales were happening on Nvidia and the like. So it wasn't too surprising, but what's surprising is that we still outperformed because we closed in the green where others closed in the red or closed flat. So that's good for Tesla. That's good news. But let's look at the line. It's like, okay, it's looking like it's following our anticipated head and shoulders guess for our pattern. Now, what are we aiming for again? Well, can I zoom out here? Let's go to a 5-minute. So, of course, we're aiming for the earnings. And let's see. So the 17th will be a Monday. And we talked about we're looking for an intersection. We have an intersection here, which is from the downward trend line, the large time frame downward trend line, and the high from September. I've always said that to 290 area would be probably the max we'd get to before earnings. I've been saying that for weeks, right? Like let's zoom out just so you can confirm, and so you can put this in your own playbook. After big moves, Tesla doesn't move much further. It kind of consolidates. So we're seeing that this horizontal line here, that's 290, is equal to around the peak from September. So we haven't crossed that yet. And the big diagonal I drew is the downward trend line from the time we fell down from the all-time highs around 415. And this has been respected pretty much so. And is it going to be respected this time, or are we going to break through it? So it makes sense to set us up to be at this intersection of those two trend lines and then have earnings done that day. So what could that look like? If we are only going to gain, we're at 281, $9 more per share, potentially. Let's look at it. So we closed here, and we need to get, this is earnings right here at the end of the trading day on the 19th. So it could look something like Monday we go up, sell off a little bit, and then by the end of Tuesday we do this. And the point being that sitting on that line will allow us to, allow the market makers to put us at a very pivotal point, a pivot point of, okay, are we going to fail the trend line and crash? And everyone's going to be talking about, oh, Tesla couldn't break the big time frame downward trend line. Obviously, this is going to sell off into oblivion. Or if we break through it, so I drew this before, you'd have to break through it and come down and test it eventually in the next couple days, and then come back off it and go up again or go down again. So there's just a couple of ways that would happen, is that it's an immediate sell-off at earnings and you never breach the downward trend line, or it's a breach on the earnings a little bit, maybe to 298, and then sell off until you hit the trend line again and test it. So I would say by the end of the month, it sells off. As all the other earnings take place, we're talking about the big companies like Microsoft, Google, Meta, and Apple. Apple will be into the beginning of August. So you could see it play out like that, where it's like up and then down and then test the trend line again and then go up with Apple. If Apple goes up, then Tesla goes up, and it all makes sense. Everything makes sense at that point. But so Tesla had a decent day. It's not amazing, but we were happy with it because the other parts of the market didn't do so hot. Like the Nvidia did really, really well this morning. You can see here, it spiked to like, I'm sorry, I have a comparison. Let me cross it out. It spiked to 480 and then just sold off real quick. And it sold off all day long. And the reason for this is because a lot of people are short Nvidia. And so they were really scared going today because Nvidia was gapped up already from the night before. Nvidia was already up a couple dollars the night before, and then it just started spiking up with the banks. When the banks were doing really well, Nvidia was going crazy. And it went crazy pre-market and then went crazy here because a lot of people were covering. A lot of covering happened this week, meaning a lot of people that were short on these high beta stocks, be it like the Upstarts or Coinbases of the world, they closed their shorts out at the most highest rate in a long time, I would say in years. They're closing out, and to close out their shorts, they have to buy stock, and that's what's happening. So it's a lot of short covering here, but also a lot of people hedging their shorts by buying calls, and a lot of people buying calls would mean that a lot of people are driving the price up just because of all the interest. So they were buying calls, and then the market didn't want to pay any of those out. Okay. Why would the market want to pay any of them out? So it's not surprising that you see the Nvidia close at 454.67, not 455. Okay. 454. That's all the market was willing to pay. So how does the market get to that point? Well, it just basically sells everything and shorts it to oblivion because they're not interested in paying out 480 calls. Can you imagine how many people just bought like a $10 call in the morning and then it would have went up like 500%? They're not paying that. They're not going to pay it. So Fridays are tough. Fridays are really tough. You have to be pretty nimble and you have to be quick because get your profit and you just get out and kind of walk away because the rest of the day would be pretty not spectacular in the least. And you can see here on the SPY, which is representing the S&P 500, which closed in the red. It closed down 0.06%. Now let's look at like I mentioned before, it didn't close at 440.48. It closed, and this is a 1 minute candle. This big green candle, that's a 1 minute candle. And it closed at just above 449. It did not want to pay the puts at 448. It did not want to pay the calls at 450. So this makes sense, right? Like it came down and then it tested the 450 here and it was like, no, we're good. Sold off immediately, right? 450, no, sell immediately. We're not paying that because they're kind of just, the market makers are just letting this action happen. Okay, people want to buy. Okay, buy. Oh no, they're getting too close and they sell. So they're honestly just protecting their self-interest. That's all today was. It wasn't that the banks' earnings were so bad. They were okay. I mean, they're not spectacular, but they're okay. You got to realize the banks have been consolidating sideways for months. They're not really that much higher than they were in spring. So it's kind of surprising that the move upwards wasn't that strong. But there's two reasons for that. Well, expirations for options today, and also that there's still a bunch of banks that need to report next week, and they kind of will go up together. And if they go up together, they can all go up. And if they look really bad and if regionals are falling apart, and they will come back down or just stay flat, and you might just see them stay flat for a long time because the threat of lower interest rates hurts banks who can't loan. So I want to do a quick macro thing, and this is not like super technical fundamental analysis. It's just the idea of, are banks that attractive? And is this important to you as a Tesla investor? Well, it could be because they will drive the market. Do we not remember what happened in spring? But I'll make it quick. So if there's this idea, the market's going up because there's this idea that inflation has peaked. And if inflation has peaked, then that means that maybe we can start getting interest rates lower, or at least not hike interest rates anymore. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that, okay, the market will front run that idea. And they're going to buy up all the stocks that have been hurt by low inflation, that have been hurt by interest rates. So they want to be in them cheap for now, and they're willing to wait, 1 or 2 years until the interest rates actually start getting cut. So that's the problem here, is that if interest rates are getting cut, we don't know when, if it happens this year or next year. What makes these banks profitable right now is the high interest rates. They're making a lot of money on deposits. They're making a lot of money on your money or their own money being put into the reverse repo, or they're being put into treasury bonds or bills. They're making just a safe 4 to 5%, and they're making it pretty consistently. So, but if the rates come down, that's good. But does it mean that their income will go higher? Not necessarily. It doesn't mean that their income will go higher. And it doesn't mean that people will start getting loans and buying things. We don't know that yet. So there's a lot of uncertainty in how banks will perform. There's also headwinds in regards to the government wanting them to have more capital reserve. They're also having their own loss reserves being built up into tunes of billions of dollars. They're putting aside every quarter because they think you, the customer, are going to default or go bankrupt and leave them with a bunch of bad debt. So they're also building up their own reserves, and they're also worried about the regional banks. We haven't heard much regional bank news because obviously the government has been bailing them out. The regional banks have been using government programs to get liquid as much as they need to get liquid, with very, very little interest penalty for themselves. So we haven't been hearing about it because the quiet bank bailout is happening on a daily basis, essentially, to the tunes of billions of dollars that people are using these programs for. So that's the kind of small macro outlook. So Tesla had a good day. Don't be surprised if it kind of mosey its way up here over a 3-day period before Thursday, because it reports on the day. Sorry, the end of the trading day on Wednesday. So if it gets to that intersection over here around 288, 289, 290 by Wednesday, don't think and don't play so hard for it to go over. Just understand that might be the max move if you're swinging Tesla. If you're not an investor and you're just swinging it, just understand that might be your max move, and that you should maybe just trim your profits, take profits at that point. That'll be a nice move. How much more would that be from now? And so you can understand a move from 281 until 290. That's 3%, or almost $9 a share. So we're talking about $9 a share, guys. So that's good money. We'll talk more next week about what we need to do to prepare ourselves for earnings and stuff like that. All right, guys. Thanks so much for listening. And this is Mark with TSLA. Have a great weekend. Bye.